Hey everyone, welcome to Cerwin-Vegas. Today we're going to go through everything you need to know to recap your own Cerwin-Vega D-9 crossovers. In case if you guys watched my last video, it was on the Cerwin-Vega D9s. These are the speakers I've had in my shop. I had them up on the shelves here, used them for well over a year after the modifications and kind of the restoration I did on them. I finally had my measurement system. I hadn't measured those ones yet, so I really was anxious to get them down and get some measurements. I did so, and I was quite shocked, actually. They measured really, really well. They ended up being a lot more accurate than I thought they would. A lot of the Cerwin-Vegas I've measured so far up to date, I haven't really measured that accurately, which isn't a big surprise. That wasn't, I mean, I'm sure it's something that they were thinking about in the design. Your goal is always to try to get an accurate speaker, but ultimately, Cerwin-Vegas, their main goal was high sensitivity. That was always their focus. So with that, you're gonna have to sacrifice a few things. And especially when it comes down to, you think about the cost of these things and they're trying to stay within a price point. They did really, really well with these D9s. So far the best original Cerwin-Vega, and when I say original Cerwin-Vega, I mean, before a company had changed hands and manufacturing changed and all that stuff. A lot of the newer stuff, that is the main goal. That is a lot of the modern stuff. They are aiming for accuracy, and when you do that, you end up with all these different parts and everything, the crossovers and just a bunch of stuff, and you're generally going to lose some sensitivity. So again, their main focus was high sensitivity speakers that you can power and get quite loud with very little power. So because those speakers turned out so well, and I was really satisfied with them, and not just because they measured well, because I loved the way they sound. They sounded awesome. When you get into that right spot in the shop, I know it's kind of about like midsection, like the bass just pounds you in the chest. They're just so almost more revealing. And I'm not gonna lie, once I had those speakers up, I kind of actually started to notice little things and maybe little imperfections in my system that I had in here. So it kind of forced me to upgrade other things in my components like cables and stuff like that, and finding little issues because the speakers actually just, you were hearing every little detail, you were also hearing every little imperfection. So because my D9s turned out so well, I decided I'm gonna do this video. I'm gonna show you guys exactly what I did, why I did what I did, how to identify which crossovers you have in your D9s, because there's a few different kinds, and even depending on what kind you have, you can turn your crossovers into the crossovers I made for my D9s, and then you can enjoy them just as much as I do. First things first, you need to identify which kind of crossovers you have. There's potentially 3 different variations, and there could potentially be more than that, just with some subtle changes here and there, nothing major. The biggest thing is there are 3 different kinds, and well, let's take a look at some schematics and let's try to figure out and help you guys out to figure out what kind of crossovers you have. So here we have the schematics for the Cerwin-Vega D9. Now, I believe this is probably going to be the most popular one. The majority of the D9 crossovers out there are going to be pretty similar to this. Now, what you want to look for, number 1, is the resistors. So looking at the schematics, this is the symbol for resistor here. Now you want to forget about the R1 and R2. Those are, if you look into the notes, R1 and R2, that's your 16 ohm 5 watt potentiometer, and every single D9 is going to have those. What you're looking at is R3, R4, and R5. So go to notes, you go down about midway here in this first row. R4 is a 15 ohm 5 watt resistor, and R3 is a 10 ohm 5 watt resistor. And then at the very end of the notes here, R5 is a 33 ohm 5 watt resistor. So you're looking at the dates here. These original drawings are 1983. And if you go to the top, you have all the different revisions. If you look down here at the bottom right, these drawings are revision F. So these drawings are were done up after all these revisions were made, and it shows them A, B, C, D, E, F. There's 2 E's. Oh, done at the same date. Makes sense. Anywho, so if you look at under revisions, you go to F, it says added R5. So why? I'm not 100% sure why they decided to add this resistor in. And there's a date beside it, and it's 1986. My crossovers did not have this R5 resistor, so that tells me that my crossovers are pre-1986. Well, February 10th, 1986. Mine were built before then, before that revision was made, because it does not have that R5. It does have, or they do have, the R4 and R3. So now what that's telling you is your crossovers, if you don't have that R5, obviously they're not going to look exactly like these drawings. But everything before that is going to be, or should be, correct. Now, the other thing, and these are some changes that were made, and these are the things that are going to be hard to identify if you don't have the ability to measure the value of your inductors. So the inductors would be this symbol here, and they're labeled with L. So there's L1, 2, and 3. There's 3 inductors in these crossovers. So L2 and L3 is a 0.5 millihenry inductor, and L3 is a 0.2 millihenry inductor. Those don't change. Basically all through the series of these D9s, those were always 0.5 and 0.2, and that's for the mid-range and the tweeter. But if you look under this L1, here it says 3.1 millihenry. So this is the inductor for the woofer. Now, majority, and again, I believe the majority of the inductors in most of the Cerwin-Vega D9 crossovers are going to be this 3.1 millihenry. But there is a chance that they could be a different value. So we're going to have to look at a different schematic here to determine what that different value might be. So moving on to the next crossover schematic for the D9, also the newest or the latest. And you look here in the bottom right, it says revision N. That's where these final drawings were made. Okay, so now we look at the diagram, you'll see that R5 is no longer there. So if you remember in the other schematics, the R5 was added early in 86. Again, for what reason, I'm not 100% sure why they decided to do that. These drawings here, original drawing was made in later in 1988. So that leads me to believe that if you have that R5 resistor in there, that's kind of like a 2-year run, early 86 to later in 88. Because once these drawings were done in 88, well, possibly 82, I'm going to look, no, there's nowhere here. It says it's deleted. So I'm going to believe that R5 resistor probably is only going to be in the 86 to 88 built speakers. What we're looking for in this schematic, though, is we want to determine the value of that L1 inductor, which is for the woofer. So the diagram, see here, L1, that's the inductor. This is for the woofer. It goes to the positive of the 15.2, W2 or WR. This goes to the positively on the woofer. We'll go down to kind of into the right side here where it's showing all the values of all the components. And if you look here, L1 goes here, coil 2.4 millihenry. So we got to try to find out why did that change, or basically just when did that change. Again, the other schematics, they showed it up to 86 was that 3.1 millihenry inductor. If we go up to, so on these schematics, we go up to the revisions, and you look here under revision L, iron slug for L1 was, and then here's the number, and it's just the different numbers for whatever they used for that iron slug that they used for the inductor. Obviously it changed. Now changing the iron core of this inductor is going to change its values. So they made a change in 1991. And that would be the change. So it went from a 3.1 millihenry inductor to a 2.4 millihenry inductor. Okay, so what does this all really mean for your Cerwin-Vega D9s, the change of the inductor? Again, this is crucial to know if you want to keep everything the way they were, because not everybody can measure these and they're not labeled what the value is. So let's take a look at the woofers, because if you can identify the date of your D9s, this is going to help you determine what inductor is in there. So one of those ways that you can do that, now, and not always. So this is, I got a kind of a mess here. This is what the original basket and woofer anyways for my D9s. You can see the drawing here, 15.2 WR. This is actually a recone. If you look, I don't have a date on mine, unfortunately. But get into the later years, this is also a D9 woofer. This is all not original. I'm trying to flip this over here with one hand. This was not original to my D9s. This was a replacement that was put in. I'm just, to find the date, you can look on the back of your woofer. Sometimes they're stamped on the inside of the cabinets. I don't know if mine were. Take a look in here. No, it might be covered up there, but I doubt it. I don't think there was any markings on the inside. So sometimes you got to rely, and if you know that you have the original woofers and yours still, this is a good way to tell the date. So this is December, and I want to say it's hard to read this one. It's and it kind of sucks because it's either 88 or 89, and the stamp is kind of jumbled up. But again, this is not original to mine, but I'm just showing you just a way for you guys to identify the date. If we go, let's look back at the schematics again. So now if you looked at the date of your woofer, and you can look here, again, we're going to go back to this revision L, where the iron slug for the L1 was changed. That was in January 1991. So if your woofers are stamped anytime after January 21st, 91, it's going to be that 2.4 millihenry inductor. And if it's anything before that, it's going to be the 3.1 millihenry inductor. Now, if that wasn't confusing enough, there's more. There's another reason that inductor might be a different value. And again, I'm not 100% sure how many of these are actually out there, or how many were actually, produced with this crossover in there, because there was a really early change. But in order to figure this one out, we're going to have to go back to the earliest Cerwin-Vega crossover schematic drawing that I was able to find. Okay, here's yet another schematic, and if you look at the bottom right, this one says revision B. So this is the earliest of the drawings. Now, we're focusing on the inductor. If you look at the schematics and the drawings for this, they probably look a lot different than what yours are, or maybe they look the same. Again, I don't know how many of these were actually out there. If you go down to the notes and where it shows all the values of your components in here, you go down to L1, which is, again, still your woofer inductor. It says 2 millihenry. I don't know how many times is that. I don't know how many are actually out there, but I thought this crossover looked a little strange, and I was looking at the drawings and I'm like, I've worked on these before, but I've never worked on a D9 with one of these before. So then I started going through some of my schematics, because if I don't have the schematic or can't find it when I get a hold of that speaker, I draw up my own. I have my own program to do so. And I went searching through all the different schematics of Cerwin-Vega speakers kind of in this era. And then I came across my drawing for the Cerwin-Vega D7. So here's the schematics that I made up for the D7. If you look up here for the L1 inductor on those D7s, I've got that inductor as a 1.92 millihenry inductor. Now that's the exact measurement that I got. it would be the same as a 2 millihenry inductor. That's what they would have called it for the D7 schematics. Again, I haven't been able to find original D7 schematics, so that's why I drew these up. I just thought that was a little strange that it'd be the same as that D7. And then if you look here on this schematic at C1, so this is the capacitor for the low pass filter for the woofer. It is a 40 microfarad capacitor. So if we go back to the early D9 drawing that I have, and let's go and let's look at C1. C1 is here again, part of the low pass filter for the woofer. It's 40 microfarad. And then I started looking at everything else. Here it shows a C2 and a C6. None of the other drawings have that. But what does have that for the drawings is the original drawing. So the D7 and the very early crossover I have, or schematics for the D9 crossover I have, they are identical. If you look through them and compare them, so it almost seems like to me when they first designed the D9, again, because both the D7 and D9, they used a tweeter and the same mid-ranges, and they're both an MTM setup. The only thing that they changed was like size of the cabinet and the little bigger woofer. They did use a different tweeter. They just kind of fitted the D7 crossover to the early D9. This is going to be one of the easier things to identify. So if you look at your D9 crossovers, and if they have two of these 15 microfarad electrolytic caps in the crossover, they are the very, very early versions. So if it has those, your inductor is going to be a 2 millihenry. And then, like the other one that we figured out, if you have a date on your woofers and you know the manufacturing date of your speakers, and if it is after this January 21st, 1991, so if it's January 21st, 91 or later, it's going to be a 2.4 millihenry inductor. Or if your crossovers are neither, or if you do not have those 215 microfarad caps in yours, and you do not have, if they're not 91 or later, it is going to be a 3.1 millihenry inductor. So this is going to be the most common one. The 3.1 millihenry is the most common. It's the one I have. And to be quite honest, I suggest, even if you don't have that one, if it is a 2.4 and there's a later version, I would suggest changing it to that 3.1. So other than everything that I just explained, there's also, again, when I said there are 3 different versions and you can identify them by looking at the resistors, you are going to have the early version with only the R3, which would be one resistor, because remember, R1 and R2 are your potentiometers, and every D9 has those. You're going to have one resistor, R3, or B, you're going to have version 2, you're going to have R3 and R4, or C, you're going to have R3, R4, and R5. So again, I believe that R5, that 3 resistor version of these crossovers, was kind of only like a 2-year thing, because it did change after the fact to the later versions. And apparently as well with those later versions, another way to be able to tell the difference, and again, I haven't seen enough of these to know for sure, but apparently the later versions that have these 2, and not all of them, is the wires. Apparently they appear to be a thicker wire. It's just a thicker jacketing on the wire, where the other earlier versions have like a thinner wire to them. That's another way to tell. Okay, if you were able to get through all that without skipping ahead, congratulations. You're probably one of very few. I know it's a lot of information to go through, and it can get really confusing. You might have to watch that a couple times to figure it out. Even for me to wrap my head around that sometimes is just kind of sucked. But what I'm going to be focusing on today is not that early version. they can be easily, that early version can easily be changed over to one of the versions I have, but that might be another video for another day. Again, I don't know how many of them are actually out there, so I don't know if it's really worth going through all that. But let's focus on getting your crossovers to match what I got, if that's what you want to do. And yeah, well, let's take a look at what I have now. I don't have an original untouched D-9 Cerwin-Vega crossover right now. I do have the original components that I pulled out. So let's take a look at those, and then it should be pretty easy for you guys to determine what you got to take out, and then I'm going to show you what to replace them with. Okay, so here's my crossovers as they sit. I did have to dismantle them a little bit. We got some loose wires and whatnot. Yours aren't going to look like this because I've already done mine. Now, the one thing that I did do is I had to add this, and I just used a couple screws, and this is actually just kind of like a piece of puck board that I use for whenever I got to kind of modify things. Anyway, I had to do this because once you go, like when you're dealing with inductors and the air cores being a little larger, and then of course this, you have to be careful with the placement of your inductors. There's certain ways that you can and can't place them, and they just have to be orientated the proper way from each other so you don't have any crosstalk. But what I did and what I replaced. So the original component here, this was the original 100 microfarad capacitor for the low pass for the woofer. This guy originally sat here. You're going to want to replace this. You have a few options. You can replace this guy with a new electrolytic 100 microfarad cap. That's what I did. This is cheap, you guys. Like this, I think this cap costs like $1 something, if that. They're very, very cheap. Not the highest quality. If you really wanted to go bigger and better and upgrade, you're gonna go with one of these, like a polypropylene cap. Just for instance, for size reasons, this is a 15 microfarad, that's 100. So to get a 100 microfarad cap in a polypropylene cap, it's probably gonna be, you know, that big around and about that big. Actually, you know what? Hold on a sec. So just for reference, this is a 90 microfarad polypropylene Dayton audio cap. That's the 100. So the 100 is going to be around the same size. It might even be a little bit larger yet. It can make things difficult. It's doable, and if you guys want and you're creative and you're able to move this stuff around, I would definitely suggest going with something like this. I might be in the near future, but because I was just kind of trying to figure out what works best, I just figured, well, I'd spend a little bit of money. Here is this is the cap to use if you wanted to use a polypropylene. The Dayton Audio DMPC 100, it's the 100 microfarad, 250 volt polypropylene capacitor. When you're dealing with the woofer, the quality of the components you're using, you're not going to notice it as much with lower frequencies. So when you're dealing with low pass filters on woofers or subwoofers, it's not as big of a deal to have really good quality parts in there. Really what it does just come down to is your power handling, and you know, the original one was 100 volts. You see it's 100 microfarad, but it's also 100 volts DC. And this one is also 100 volts rated. So you do not want to put something in here that is less than what the original is for voltage rating. You want to match it or exceed it. Because it's okay if it's a higher voltage. If you look here, because this is a better quality one, this one's rated at 250 volts. So that's okay. That's actually better. The higher the voltage, probably the higher quality capacitor it is. So you want to swap out this guy for a new cap. Again, your choice, electrolytic or non-electrolytic, depends how much playing around you want to do with the crossover. Let's stay with the caps. This guy, I 100% I would not cheap out and go with an electrolytic. This 15 microfarad does filter. It's in the signal path for the mid-ranges. You do not want this crap in there for the mid-range. Garbage, get rid of it. Go with a polypropylene. This is the replacement here. I know this kind of came loose on me when I was pulling things apart, but so I replaced this guy with this 15 microfarad Dayton audio cap. Moving down the line to the next, we'll say, well, the next largest. So this would have been, this is one of the original Mylar caps that I pulled out of here. These are better than electrolytics, but they're still, these are pretty cheap. Again, it's easy to get, it's easy and not much more money to upgrade to one of these polypropylenes. Now this is a 5 microfarad, and that's what it calls for in the schematics. This guy here, this is the one I replaced it with. It's a 5.1 microfarad, 250 volt polypropylene capacitor. Now, it is 0.1 microfarads off of the original. This is not gonna make a difference. If you look in the specs here, this is actually a 5% tolerance capacitor, where the originals that are gonna be in there are probably gonna be at best 10%, sometimes 20% plus or minus. And then we got this small little guy in here. That guy replaced this one. And this is, it's kind of hard to see, there's a glue on it still here. So this is plus or minus 10%. It's a 200 volt DC. Again, I don't know if this is actually the original one I pulled out of here. I went through all my caps that I saved. This could have been on something else, but yeah, this is a 2.5 microfarad capacitor, and I used this guy here, which is a 2.7 microfarad, and it is a 250 volt, 5% tolerance cap. Again, you're not going to notice that 0.2% or that 0.2 microfarad. It could vary. This might even be closer to spec than what this guy was. Maybe. You never know. Either way, it doesn't, you're never going to notice. So those are the caps. So if you just simply want to do a recap, that's all you got to know. These are the 4 caps that you're going to pull out, and these are the caps that you're going to replace them with. If you're wanting to take it up another level, you can also change out your inductors. And again, if you're trying to stay on a budget, and if you've already decided you're going to use an electrolytic, like a new electrolytic, to replace the 100 microfarad capacitor for the woofer, if you're trying to save money, I wouldn't do what I did and use this air core. And there's a reason for that. This is almost kind of pointless for me putting in there, considering I got this guy in there. So this is actually going to change for a reason. But this is the original inductor. This is the 3.1 millihenry inductor for the woofer. It is an iron core. It's got that iron slug in here. And it's got, I believe it's about 0.5 ohms of DC resistance. Now, again, that kind of matters because this air core, which is a better quality inductor, this is a 3 millihenry inductor. It actually has 1 ohm of DC resistance. So there's actually a little bit more resistance in this guy than the original, but it is air core and it is a better quality. But to get the same quality or the same DC resistance as this iron core inductor in an air core, it's going to be very large. If you want to replace that and you want to match the DC resistance of the original and go with an air core, this is the one to go with. The Janssen Audio 3 millihenry 15 gauge air core inductor. So if you can look at the price, it's going to be a lot more money. You got to buy 2 of them, so you're $100 just in that one coil itself. And then you got to try to fit it in there. And the reason it's more money is it's the same amount of wraps to get the same value, the same 3 millihenry value. It's a larger gauge. It's a 15 gauge, whereas the original is an 18 gauge iron core and mine is an 18 gauge air core, and that's why that DC resistance goes up a little bit. So again, if you're going to go with the electrolytic cap for this guy, save your money and just reuse this iron core inductor for the woofer, because most people aren't really going to notice much of a difference anyways. What I do suggest on doing though, and again, it's up to you, you can do a simple recap, but I would suggest getting rid of these smaller inductors for these guys. And this one here, these are both Dayton Audio inductors. This one is a 0.2 millihenry inductor. It's a 20 gauge and it's got 0.29 ohms of resistance. I have measured the original 0.2 millihenry inductor that came out of here, and this has, again, about 0.5 ohms of DC resistance. I believe they all were, so that was probably what they were aiming for, was about half an ohm DC resistance, because this guy, the 0.5 millihenry, also had that same half ohm DC resistance. Again, this is an iron core, and this is the air core that I replaced it with. It is a 0.5, it might even be a 0.51, I think it's 0.5. It is actually 0.5 millihenry. And this one actually matches. This one has 0.49 ohms of DC resistance. So this inductor is actually pretty much a perfect match, just a much better quality than this guy. So those are actually not too hard to do. Again, you can do what I did here. I kind of used these tabs that were on the plate, and I drilled holes, made a plate, cut it to size, and just kind of fabbed it in there. I got holes drilled in here. You can see where I had everything kind of hot glued. I did have all these wires coming up and through here just to kind of neaten everything up. I had to kind of pull all that apart to get this off to show you guys. But being able to fit these in here without doing this, it just, to me, wouldn't look as neat. So again, I chose to do it this way, and then I was able to keep all the inductors away from each other. One of the biggest things when you're looking at proper placement for inductors, I'll actually put up a chart here and just kind of show you guys, it gives you a distance, give or take, and just what is good and bad. One of the main things to think about is you never ever want to be able to look through the center of an air core inductor and see another inductor. So if there was this guy right here, that's no good. If you do have to have them sitting beside each other, you want to make sure so you can see how this is coiled this way and this one's coiled that way. This is a way you can put them if you have to put them close to each other, because again, you cannot see one looking through the other. But that chart pretty much tells you everything you need to know on the proper inductor placement. Other than that, you guys just really, if you're good with a soldering iron, it helps. Even if you're not, practice. It doesn't take much. Not all my soldering is always the greatest either, but you know what? It gets the job done. And yeah, you might just have to move a couple things around. One other thing I'm going to suggest as well is this guy here. Take the clamps off here. If you look at the front of this plate, here is your push to reset. This is your tweeter protection overload. Get rid of it. They're useless and probably don't work anyways. If you guys are powering these properly, you do not have to worry about this. 9 times out of 10, what kills tweeters is people using too small of an amplifier and they're trying to drive it too hard. And you end up clipping the amplifier, and that is what's going to take out tweeters. Even having this circuit breaker in there, if it does work, or even there are different kinds. There's also what's called a poly switch, where I've seen some people kind of add in here, which seems like a good idea, so long as you know that this circuit breaker really doesn't actually work and nothing can pass through. Tying that in there, I get it. It's kind of, it's a self-resetting circuit breaker, and it's just, I don't really think it's needed. And the more stuff you have in the signal path going to your drivers of your speaker, you're just losing quality. And if you've got a proper amplifier or you know how to power them properly, you don't need this kind of stuff. Even this main fuse protection. Like, I kept it in here, but like, this is a huge like bottleneck for basically quality. I may actually bypass mine. I did end up going up to a 3 amp slow blow overall fuse in mine, and I did actually run it. I tested it out with an Adcom GFA 555. It's a 900, it's rated about 900 watts, bridged at 4 ohms. And I gave her heck, and I was able to pop the 3 amp slow blow fuse before I had any issues with the drivers. But again, if you know how to power these things properly, I would bypass this, which is, again, your overall fuse. You can leave everything in there. You just literally would have to match up this wire to here, and then you can bypass this altogether, because it is a bottleneck in the crossover, and it's going to hurt sound quality quite a bit. So I would bypass this guy. So all you got to do for that is desolder the wires that are going from this side. So if you look here, it's just this guy here off this potentiometer. You desolder this and then just hook it up to these here. This is one of the wires that ran up here. But if you keep track of everything, and the beauty thing about doing this stuff yourself, you guys, you got 2 crossovers that are exactly the same. So don't dismantle both at the same time. You can dismantle one, take all these, whatever parts you decide that you're going to replace, you can pull them all apart and do what you got to do, and then you still have your second one as a reference, just to make sure that everything is hooked up the same way. It's easy to do even if you don't have those schematics with you, because sometimes those are kind of confusing to read for some people. But I would definitely bypass this. You're going to get a lot more quality, a lot more clarity out of that tweeter. Again, up to you if you want to bypass that overall fuse. That's another thing that's going to step up the quality a bit. And then I would probably suggest getting rid of these old Sandcast resistors. These are garbage and cheap as heck. You can get new ones. You can go on Dayton Audio, has some pretty decent ones. I believe Dayton Audio has them. There's a bunch of different brands. Don't replace them with like new Sandcast resistors, because it's not really going to be any difference. Again, these generally don't go bad. They just aren't really the best sounding, and there's definitely better ones out there. So yeah, if you're handy, you can get all this done and do it yourself and spend a fraction of what somebody's going to charge you. Okay, there's just one thing I want to show you guys, and it has to do with the schematics that I was showing you and the later versions. So again, this is that 3.1 millihenry inductor for the woofer. The changes, it didn't say that the inductor itself really changed much. It was just talking about the iron slug that changed. So what I did is I just kind of broke some of the glue off of this. This is the original one. And I pulled the iron slug out of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show a quick measurement, and it just gives you guys an idea. Hook my clamps up here. Of why changing this iron slug is going to change the value of this inductor. So I'm just going to fire my program up here. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to be measuring inductance. So you can see right here, right now I'm measuring 0.82 millihenry. Watch what happens when I drop this iron slug into that inductor. Changed it to 3.069 millihenry, or 3.1, that's what they called it. And depending on how far it's in there, it changes the value. So because this iron slug may have made that change, and I think what they say it changed to 2.4, I can simply drop this slug in there and I can make this inductor measure 2.4. Just like that. It was just something neat I thought I'd show you guys. All right, there you go. Everything you need to know to rebuild your own D-9 crossovers. If you add everything up, the cost isn't huge for the parts. When you're paying someone to rebuild these for you, you're gonna pay a pretty good penny, and what you're paying for essentially is that knowledge for someone like myself. And I know there's lots of other people out there that do this kind of work. There's actually some people that do it specifically for Cerwin-Vega stuff. I'm not trying to say that any of them do bad work or anything. This is just what I did with mine. It's kind of like the best bang for your buck for upgrading and getting a better sound quality. And I can tell you this firsthand, it's definitely an improvement, and there's no way in chance that you're not gonna hear it. It's just inevitable. You're gonna hear the difference, and then, man, these D9s sound great. So I'm not trying to take anything away from anybody else. It's a popular speaker. There's a lot of them out there, and I just figured why not give it all the do-it-yourselfers a little bit of knowledge to maybe save $1 or $2 and maybe take your crossovers a step above. That's going to do it for this video. At the very end here, I'm just going to, I'll show exactly what components I took out and then which ones I replaced. Just kind of a quick little kind of slideshow at the end. And yeah, that does it. Till next time, Cerwin-Vega, big or small, save them all.